Good evening. Here we are at Leroux Studios, owned and operated by my friend Brian Buss, who graciously allowed me to record this video here. Has nice decor and pretty good acoustics too. So we're going to talk about triangle today, and we want to make sure that we set our students up for success. We're going to talk about what types of triangles these are in a minute, but first of all, before we even talk about the triangle, we're going to talk about the clip, because I've walked into a lot of schools that have nice triangles, and yet it's hanging off of a clip where there's like one super long string, so every time the student plays the triangle, it spins around a million times. So we don't want that to be the case, because then it'll be very difficult for the student to have control over what they're doing. So you can see here that what I've done is I've put this particular clip. This is an actual triangle clip which you can buy, or you can just go to a hardware store and get what's called a hardware clip and then drill 2 holes through it. And what I've done with this one is I've put 2 cords of French horn valve cable through it, so that if one of the cords breaks, the triangle is not going to fall and hit the floor of the stage, which of course is going to happen during the most quiet, serene, beautiful, and peaceful moment of the concert. And of course the stage is going to be made out of hardwood, as Murphy's Law dictates. So in any case, this is what we're going to do. If you're a right-handed percussionist, then what you're going to want is to have the opening be to your left, and we'll talk about the reason why in a couple of seconds. So the closed part is to my right, the open part is to my left, and I'm feeding the triangle through both cables, and here it is on my clip. We're going to be talking about 2 different types of triangles today. This is the Alan Abel triangle, which is made out of, Alan Abel was a percussionist in the States for a long time, a very good percussionist, who also patented the design of this triangle. And he actually, he got the idea from a knitting mill spool, so that's how he got the idea to taper the metal like this, and it actually ends up resulting in sounding very good. And you can see that this is a nice isosceles triangle. These 2 ends are longer than this end, but right down the middle, it's symmetrical from one side to the other in terms of the dimensions of the triangle. So this is an isosceles triangle. It's made out of stainless steel. And this is a Grover triangle. It is an equilateral triangle, so all 3 sides are the same length. And it's actually made out of a different blend of metals, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But we're going to start with the Abel. This is perhaps the most commonly used triangle. And first we're going to talk about how to hold it. So what you can do, you're going to have your students do, is with their left hand do this. So it's kind of like the Spock Live Long and Prosper, except with the pinky finger, ring finger, middle finger connected, the index finger off on its own, and the thumb off on its own. So I'm going to set the front of the clip on the middle finger, I'm going to set the back of the clip on the thumb, and I'm going to steady and bounce the top with the index finger. And now I have this. And that's how we're going to hold the triangle. Now that I'm holding the triangle, something that you'll sometimes notice is that you can always tell when the triangle player is about to play or while they're playing at the back of an orchestra, because they actually stand and hold it up in the air. They're not necessarily holding it up like this. As you can see, this is kind of awkward for me. So what you can do is you can kind of hold it off to the side like this, so that you're reaching over in a little bit more of an ergonomic fashion. You still want the sound to be able to project over the orchestra and out to the audience, but you still want to be physically comfortable while you're doing it. Regarding whether you want to practice triangle standing or seated, if you do want to practice triangle seated, if you're a total class 10 nerd like me and you're going to practice triangle for a long period of time, then you can practice while seated, but what I'd recommend is that you have good posture first, so stand first, and then hold up the triangle the way you're going to play it, and then have a seat, but don't actually change anything about how you're holding the triangle. Don't sit down first and then be like, okay, it's time to practice now, because then if you're leaning, for example, then now your legs are interfering with your arms' abilities to hinge freely, and if your back posture is poor, then it's going to mess up the way your shoulders are. So pretend you're standing even if you are sitting when playing the triangle, because you're always going to be standing when you're playing the triangle in an orchestral environment. So regarding the Abel, because it's made out of one pure type of metal, it's very easy to get 3 different tones out of it. And you can get a variety of different tones, but there are 3 main ones that you can get. So the first main one is this one. And you can hear that that's a pretty clear and clean high tone. The second one you can get is this one, which is lower, and you can hear that it's also a pretty clear and clean tone. You notice that I got this one by hitting there, this one I got hitting by 90 degrees, and then this one I'm going to hit 45 degrees. And when I strike that one, you can hear that it's a blend not only of the first and second tones, but of a whole bunch of other tones as well. That is the tone that most conductors, in my experience, tend to prefer, because the fact that it's a blend of a variety of tones means that there's no one particular tone that's really going to stand out and potentially interfere with and clash with what the rest of the orchestra is doing. So that's why, I mean, it is an idiophone, which is to say it's a metal object that creates its sound by the entire object resonating. So when we create our one beautiful long sound, which often happens on triangle, it's often featured with a nice long note, we want to make sure that we're getting a sound that's going to blend with the orchestra very well. Now this triangle, on the other hand, the Grover triangle, is made out of a wide variety of metals blended together. So you can tell the difference between this tone, if I play them the same way I play them on the able, that tone versus that tone versus that tone. The widest blend of tones is still achieved by striking on the bottom on a 45-degree angle, but regardless of where I strike the triangle, I'm still getting a pretty wide variety of tones. So this triangle is a little bit more of a fail-safe option in terms of creating a blending tone than the other one. We're going to talk about beaters now as well. As you can see, I've laid out a variety of beaters for myself. This is the Grover beater set. It goes from thickest here to thinnest there. Now, one may think that in order to create the loudest sound, you would use the thickest beater to create the loudest sound and the thinnest beater to create the quietest sound. And that is partially true, but another thing to consider is the fact that with the thicker beater, the curve is more subtle because it's larger around, it's thicker around. So when I strike with this beater, more surface area of the beater is going to come in contact with more surface area of the instrument, and therefore I'm going to get a different sound than if I strike with this beater, such that less surface area of the beater is going to come in contact with less surface area of the instrument. So for example, if I strike with this beater, I try to get about the same volume with a thicker beater, it does in fact generate a slightly different sound. You get a different contact sound out of it, and you get a different decay after the contact sound. So obviously it's easier for me to play ridiculously loud with this beater, and it's easier for me to play extremely quietly with this beater, but they do generate different tone options for you. So that's that. In terms of holding the beater, the reason why we encourage you to hold the beater is, like one of the things I like to talk about with percussion instruments is what did the composer write for and what did the composer not write for. The composer wrote for triangle, which means that the only sound that the composer actually wants to get is the sound of the triangle. There is a clip, which means that you can clip it onto the music stand, but when you do that, regardless of how many, like, various percussionists have experimented with stuffing layers of felt in here and different, like, layers of terry cloth and you know, to create little pillows to try to isolate it from the music stand. You're still going to get rattling from the music stand, and the composer wrote for triangle, not triangle and the sound of the music stand rattling. So if you want to gather in, come in a little bit closer here just for a second. You can hear the difference between this versus this. You can actually hear that there's quite a bit of mechanical rattling sound from the stand, despite the fact that the clip has soft jaws on it, and despite the fact that the triangle is hanging off the clip. So the triangle is removed several levels from the music stand, but you can still hear the music stand rattling. That's why we want to hold it whenever we can. Examples of times when we cannot hold it are obviously if you have if you have insufficient time to switch from one instrument to the triangle, or insufficient time to switch from the triangle to another instrument. Then you can leave the triangle clipped on the stand, play your other instrument, set your mallets down, pick your beater up, strike the triangle, set the beater down, pick up the mallets, go back to playing the other instrument. But anytime you can pick up the triangle, you absolutely should do so. So now that we've talked a little bit about just playing and how to get the best sound out of the instrument, we're going to talk about rolling. Rolling on the triangle, of course, when you roll on any instrument, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a sustained sound. On the snare drum, that's fairly easy to do. On suspended cymbal, it's easy to do. On triangle, it's essentially impossible to do, but there are various things that we can do in order to try to mask the aspects of the sound that are not a sustained sound as much as possible. So I've talked before about playing suspended cymbal away from the center. The center of the cymbal is where it's being suspended from. As such, the closer to there you strike it, the more you're going to be able to hear contact sound. So that's why I say to strike the suspended cymbal at the outside edges. And cymbals are idiophones. Triangles are also idiophones. As such, the triangle is resonating the least rather, from the point from which it is being suspended. As such, for me to get maximum ring and minimum contact sound, I'm going to want to try to play it away from where it's being suspended. This is why, as a right-handed player, I want the closed part here, so that when I'm rolling down here, I don't run the risk of my beater slipping out of the triangle itself. So I'm going to be rolling over here, and you can actually hear the difference between rolling up here. I'm not getting very much ring, I'm getting a lot of contact sound, whereas when I roll down here, I'm getting more ring and less contact sound. I'm actually getting so much ring that when I'm performing in an acoustically live concert space, the ring is going to overtake the contact sound enough that the audience is going to hear more ringing and less contact sound, which of course is what you want for a roll. The other reason why I roll down here and not up here is because with pretty much every other instrument that we play, xylophone, snare drum, etc., we're always playing straight up and down. This is a very natural and ergonomic, you know, it's conducive to physiological health to play straight up and down. Playing side to side, we play bass drum like that, but that's really the only instrument that we play like that, and we don't typically have to play bass drum extremely quickly, not with one hand anyway. So then when you'll notice that when you play, if you watch my right shoulder, when I play triangle and I roll up here, I have a tendency to shrug my shoulder up and to be uncomfortable, whereas down here, all that I'm doing is I'm taking the straight up and down motion and I'm angling it slightly. So I'm going straight up and down, and I'm just turning my arm over and doing exactly the same thing, so that I'm striking the triangle relatively equivalent angle here to up there, to down there, to up there. That way I'm not getting more volume here, less volume here. I'm getting about equivalent volume back and forth. So that's a little bit about rolling. Now in terms of dynamics, obviously the more you move a stick or a beater of any kind, the more volume you're going to get. That's why it's louder when you strike a snare drum from up there than it is when you strike it from down there. So if I want to play louder on the triangle, a louder roll on the triangle, I want the beater to travel more distance, which means that I want to roll further into the instrument so that it has more distance to travel. If I want a quieter roll, I'm going to roll in the corner so that the beater travels less distance. So obviously this, you know, this factors into how we're going to crescendo and decrescendo on the triangle. And we're going to talk a little bit about dampening in this particular instance. Dampening is obviously accomplished by grabbing onto the triangle with your hand. Not necessarily all at once, sometimes gradually. That's one of the main reasons why we hold the triangle like this, is so that we can dampen it. So if I'm crescendoing, I want the triangle to accumulate more ring. So obviously I'm not going to dampen it. I'm going to gradually move from the inside to the outside, or from the corner to the inside of the instrument to get it louder. But if I want to decrescendo, if I want to start really loud and then get quieter, you notice that the problem that I have is I am getting quieter, but maybe I'm not getting quieter quite as quickly as I want to, because the triangle is still ringing quite a bit from when I played it loud. So if I sort of do it at a side aspect for you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing the roll loud, and then I'm going to gradually apply a little bit of my hand to the instrument to help me decrescendo. So that's a little bit about how dampening can help. You'll also need to dampen from time to time in your music. You'll have open stroke markings and dead stroke markings. Open strokes are identified by having an O either above or below the note. Dead stroke is with a plus above or below the note, so an open stroke is open. A dead stroke is struck with it being dead, so sometimes you'll see notation like that. Especially in folklore music like South American samba music that uses triangle, for example, you'll see that kind of notation. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is two-handed playing versus ricochet playing. And this is, what this is kind of getting at is how you're going to play really fast passages on the triangle. Maybe if you're at a higher tempo and you have a lot of 16th notes, you can only go so fast with one hand, and you're going to be really laboring, and it's going to cause you to play a little bit louder than maybe you want to if you want to have complete control over your dynamics. So for more novice players, two-handed playing is an option, and that's where, particularly if you have the luxury of having two matching beaters, which I do, you can actually mount the triangle on the stand. Another way of doing it, which works particularly well if you have an equilateral triangle like this one, is if you use two clips, at which point now you've got this, and I'm going to clip this onto the stand, and now I have an unwavering level playing surface where I can actually, you can see I'm still playing on a 45-degree angle so that I get that nice blended sound. So that's one way of getting fast passages out. For more advanced playing, however, you are actually going to be expected to execute all triangle excerpts with one hand, one-handed technique. And if you look at orchestral excerpt lists for auditions, almost every single time, like 99.9% of the time, if not 100% of the time, there's going to be an asterisk at the end of the triangle list, and it's going to say you are expected to play excerpts one-handed. This is particularly difficult because this is the only case in which the downstroke and the upstroke both matter. You need to be able to control the downstroke and control the upstroke. So just like when you're rolling, it's essentially what you're doing. You're just making sure that you don't do that and the beater is not spending extra time on the instrument. You need to make sure it's bouncing off on the way down and bouncing off on the way up, down, up. But unlike with rolling, where you're just kind of moving your hand as fast as it feels comfortable to do, you're actually trying to control the rhythm of what you're doing. So you're actually trying to execute rhythm inside of the triangle. And that's a little bit about triangle playing. Thank you very much for watching. Have a nice evening.